So in the previous year of me playing games, not 2024, but in 2023, I really didn't play that many games, to be honest with you. I think all I did was just play Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, because I was really into the TCG, The Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, because I couldn't skip it, obviously, and then a lot of Final Fantasy VII Remake Integrate on PC in order to get more footage and get more familiarized while I was working on finishing that Combat Comprehensive video. So I'm proud to say that when it comes to 2024 gaming, I actually feel pretty good about it. I actually played a good amount of titles this year across a bunch of different genres and a bunch of different platforms, and I managed to fit all of this in while having just kind of a crazy year happen for me. I mean, I've really had the pendulum kind of swing from just being like mind-numbingly bored and just waiting for things to happen at times to like just being so hyper busy, I just felt like I didn't have any space. I have beaten a fair amount of games this year, and this isn't the entire stack, by the way, because there's some digital titles in here. I just kind of wanted to talk about them in a video format like this, end of the year, just because I felt like I had at least a little bit to say about everything that I played and beat this year. So I maybe try to expose some people to some of these games that they might otherwise know about, give out my thoughts, not necessarily a review, but just some impressions. So let's talk about every game that I've played this year in 2024. So if you were to ask me what was the most defining moment of 2024 for gaming for you, it was getting a PlayStation 5. I really hadn't done any 9th gen gaming stuff prior to picking up my PS5 in February of 2024. I really didn't play any 9th gen games or anything like that. So, but Rebirth was coming out, I didn't want to get spoiled, and I'm like, fine, it's time for me to pick up the console, maybe play some other like PS4 classics I missed, maybe some games that don't maybe run now that well on PC I can play on here. I already talked extensively about the PS5 in a video that I made about 2 or 3 weeks after I got the console, so I don't really want to reiterate too much here. I will say as an addendum to that video, I'm actually incredibly shocked how far like the PS5's incredibly tiny storage has gotten me. That I actually have managed to put 10 like almost full-size games into this thing's SSD, which is kind of incredible because I was expecting maybe half of that. I managed to actually fit 5 PS5 games and 5 PS4 games onto this thing before really running out of space. I also want to say that the DualSense, after having beaten a bunch of games using this thing, is now definitively my favorite controller ever, just in terms of ergonomics and how it feels and how good it is and stuff. Really, my only complaint with the DualSense, and this might even be more of a nitpick, is that I feel like the bottom handles could be slightly longer. That everywhere else on the controller, I feel like I have a pretty good like grip on and it's not gonna fly out. But like that last bottom bit, like where like the last couple fingers are, it just, for some reason, doesn't feel like I'm holding the controller like all the way tight. The first big game that I actually really beat on PS5 was Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I really don't really have that much to add because I've made tons and tons of other videos about this game. You can go watch them in other places, so I'm sure you're sick and tired of hearing me talk about this game. So let's move on to the next one.
Take it from here.
Alright, for the next big PS5 game that I played, I got Star Wars Jedi Survivor, the 2023 sequel to Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, made by Respawn, published by EA. Now, I liked Fallen Order quite a lot, and Jedi Survivor is an improvement, albeit not on the technical side. I specifically picked up the PS5 version because I had heard so many bad things about the PC version, but it was only after I started playing the game a significant portion that apparently the PS5 version itself is still borked about as much as the PC version is now, so like, I don't even know why I even bothered.
Jedi Survivor builds on top of the 3D Metroidvania design that Jedi Fallen Order does and takes it to a whole new level. I genuinely cannot believe how good the level design of Survivor is. I would open up doors or zip lines to backtrack to previous areas, and I thought to myself, wow, this is pretty clever. The combat in this game is also pretty fun. It's kind of similar to Sekiro if you squint your eyes a lot. You have to break an enemy's parry meter before dealing significant damage to them, but you also have all these these different weapon configurations and force powers to mess with on top of that. And by the way, I love the force powers in this game. You can stick guys to the ground, you can use them as human shields, you can launch them towards enemies. Super satisfying in this kind of combat system that you're not just using your lightsaber, but you have this extra dimensionality to it. The lightsaber stances I absolutely loved in this game. Being able to select a loadout of different ways to fight enemies really mixes things up and encourages you to experiment, find new ways of engaging if you're struggling in certain areas. By the end of the game, I was super into the cross hilt and blaster as my two stances I would switch between. Cross hilt would just shred through enemies and stuff if you only had to worry about melee combat. I found blaster was good for poking at long range of the more annoying enemies before being able to close in. I also think the game's ability progression is also paced very well. There's enough of the different combat styles that you're always messing with something new, and you can get pretty familiar with all of them by the end of the game if you play them as they get introduced to you. The story itself is also pretty great. There's so many interesting twists and turns that this game takes that left my jaw on the floor. I know Star Wars has a negative reputation now, but I promise you, this game stands alone in its writing and narrative. It's nothing like any of those Disney Plus Star Wars shows, I promise you.
Also, I want to say that if you're interested in picking up this game physically, do not buy the physical 9th gen version of this game. You see this disc right here? This disc is a paperweight. It doesn't actually do anything. It just has you download the game from the internet itself. The game's 150 gigabytes. This game only comes on one Blu-ray. Do the math.
It's coming a little hot. Oh, really hot! Hold on!
So, after I had gotten my PS5, I started really developing like a strong appetite for a lot of Sony's first-party output. That I really don't know Sony's first-party stuff as well as Nintendo's, and so I thought, okay, I'm gonna go through and play some of the games that I haven't really played before on PS5. And so I decided to pick up this game, Shadow of the Colossus PS4 Remake. Shadow of the Colossus is a remake of a PS2 game that was originally made by Team Ico, published by Sony Interactive Entertainment in 2005, with the PS4 remake coming out in 2018, developed by Bluepoint, again published by Sony Interactive Entertainment. Now, it's taken me about a decade to actually play this game because I've had a passing interest in Shadow of the Colossus for more than 10 years at this point. I remember watching YouTube videos from, I think, a couple years after the HD remaster on PS3 of Shadow of the Colossus came out, and I saw so much of the gameplay and stuff in like a couple of the first Colossi. I'm like, man, this game is so cool and I want to play it one day.
A lot of people say that Team Ico games are too artsy-fartsy for them, and I do feel like I'm the kind of person that looks at those same kinds of games as normally not into them. But Shadow of the Colossus, I am really into. Truly, the Team Ico games were the prestige PlayStation games prior to PlayStation just shoving every single game into that prestige mold like they do now. The objective of Shadow Colossus is to take down 16 of the humongous colossi roaming the land, each one effectively acting as a puzzle to solve of how do you get onto these things to hit their weak spots. You have a very limited moveset on purpose. There's no Link freezing time in midair to shoot your arrows or any fancy backflips or shield parries or anything like that. You have your ability to move, jump, pick things up, grab on to things, hit stuff with arrows, and hit stuff with a sword. That's it. And different combinations of those moves will get you to the kill. I really love this game's atmosphere so much. The sheer scale of the world, but it being so completely empty, combined with the cloudy skies and the somber music, it's just melancholy. There's just this absence of any sense of triumph in going through your mission that in a normal game, taking down these colossi would be like this super hyped up video game achievement. But here, it's not exactly that. Shadow of the Colossus is also a weird, messed up 3D Zelda game if you think about it hard enough. A lot of the tropes that make a 3D Zelda game are here in this game. Boss battles, world exploration on a horse, even puzzle solving. But there's not anything like dungeons or interacting with quest givers in Zelda games that you can find in Shadow of the Colossus. It takes sort of that Zelda skeleton and really strips it down to the barest of bare essentials. In fact, I feel like Shadow of the Colossus' particular open world nature has aged probably better than you would think that it does for a game from 2005. That in 2005, games did definitely have large worlds in their open world games and stuff like that. But now with games that just sell themselves on these huge, gigantic maps with the freedom to go anywhere and that kind of stuff, Shadow of the Colossus having this like empty, broken world that you have to go through and kill the Colossi makes it stand out even more, arguably, than when it was contemporary.
I highly recommend, if you haven't played this game already, please do play it. Is it a little bit overhyped by a lot of the people espousing its praises? Yeah, I think so. But to me, it's such an incredible gaming experience. It takes so many different things about video games and turns them on their head, but yet is like the most video gamey, the most quintessential at its core. I really wish that this game was like on PC or something so more people could experience it. This game is just so good, and really the fact that really only PlayStation players have experienced it so far is kind of a shame. I really think more people deserve to enjoy it. So anyways, the next game I ended up playing on PS5 was the Medieval PS4 remake, which I know that's weird that I ended up playing two PlayStation remakes like fairly close to each other, but that's just kind of how it worked out. Medieval PS4 was developed by Other Ocean Interactive, published by Sony Interactive Entertainment in late 2019, and it's a remake of a really old PlayStation 1 game. This game's actually super interesting because from what I can gather, this game did really not sell that many copies. According to the Insomniac hack from 2023, this game only sold like 550,000 copies max across digital and physical. So, of course, like the first chance I got, I had to pick up a physical copy. Medieval is like a weird adventure game. Like there is combat in it, but the combat's like, in my opinion, not very good. There is like a little bit of platforming that you do with jumps and stuff like that. For the most part, it's an adventure game. You're going into houses, you're trying to find keys or items and stuff, backtrack, open things, fight enemies when it becomes necessary. You're trying to find hidden exits and, you know, hidden entrances and stuff like that. It's very fun and refreshing to play in a game format that I'm not really accustomed to the tropes to, and I really sort of have to learn and intuit things and like get familiar with the game's style.
The way I describe the game's combat is that it feels very sloppy. You really can't avoid getting hit in combat. Just the way that it works, you're just kind of running through large groups of enemies and just hitting them, and there's no real like sort of one-on-one counterplay. You can run, but you can't dodge. You kind of have to like eat it while you're hitting enemies and then block while it eats away at your shield while enemies are hitting you. I love the art direction of this game so much. The very cartoony feeling of this world, the way that every level feels distinct from each other, the bold use of colors and shapes in the way each level is built. One boss that really impressed me from an artistic angle was the stained glass demon. It wasn't using any sort of intense cutting-edge photorealistic rendering techniques or anything, and it looks really, really good and really expressive and moves in a very particular way, and I was really impressed by it. I also really like this game's sense of humor, just the way that characters animate, the exaggerated cartooniness. There's just something about it that's sort of very charming. Obviously, it takes place in sort of a dark world, but it's a sort of like fun, goofy darkness that you have to overcome and push past with a good sense of humor.
Now, I really, really like Medieval Remake because to me, this is like the textbook definition of like a 7 out of 10 video game to me. Like, yes, the game's not perfect, it has flaws, but the good outweighs the bad. There are fun ideas in here, and the game executes on its premise mostly well. Now, when September ended up rolling around, I actually went and got Astrobot because, well, why wouldn't I? Now, when I'm talking about Astrobot, I'm also going to include Astro's Playroom because I also played it this year. And to me, Playroom and the full Astrobot game are essentially the same thing. I mean, I really see no major difference in terms of quality between the two, of like the level design or the music or just the graphical fidelity in general. I really had like a hunger for a 3D platformer. The last one that I had played was SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrate. I had played it like, I think 2 years ago when I played it for that Intel Arc video, so I was about right in the mood for another one.
Astrobot is such a clever and creative game that always makes me smile when I play it. All the level designs feel very inspired, clever, interesting in the way that only a 3D platformer can. And the specific levels that are homages to PlayStation franchises are probably some of the best levels in the game and are among my favorite. It's very clear that this game takes heavy influence from Nintendo games overall, not just 3D Mario in particular. There's elements of like Pikmin in there, with all the different Astros following you around in the hub world, or some Splatoon elements with some of the ink enemies. Finding all of the dressed up Astros is obviously the biggest draw for completing the game for a lot of people, including myself. And I really went out of my way to go and find all of these Astros and do all of the secret levels to get all of them. This game also is by far the best use of the DualSense and just controller haptics in general in any video game I've ever played. You can feel every single action that you take and every single surface that Astro runs across differently from each other, which is insane. I will say my only minor nitpick is that this level of immersion and just having constant feedback from the DualSense really can be kind of annoying and throw me off a little bit. That my game sense was always just thrown a little bit off because I was just receiving constant amount of feedback for everything I did. Anyways, I highly recommend Astrobot. Go out and play it.
So I will reluctantly admit, I'm kind of bad at the retro gaming thing. It's not that I don't respect the history and the technology of older games and game consoles. It's not that I can't play older games. There are plenty of older games that I can play and enjoy, and it's not that they're too hard for me either. And it's not for a lack of setup either. I mean, I have multiple CRTs that are PVM quality that I have older consoles hooked up to right now. The problem that I struggle with is I never really feel like that I can properly dedicate enough time for retro gaming that it really deserves. That I have like all of these other things going on in my life that I am trying to juggle, right? I mean, my day job, just general life stuff, and then what time I do have for hobbies. I mean, I make YouTube videos, all the sub-steps involved with that. I keep up with contemporary modern games. Plus, I also do photography stuff, and I network. So, like, when you boil it all down, retro games really don't have like any time that I could fit in there specifically. But earlier this year, I actually got a new job. And this job involves long hours, but I get multiple regular breaks throughout the day. And so I thought to myself, I could probably play video games. Okay, so I have like this small window of gaming time that is completely disconnected from the rest of the ecosystem of my gaming, right? I mean, I'm at work, I obviously can't access my own PC, my PS5, even the Switch, you would think would be a fit because, well, it's the most recent portable console and blah, 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 but like, the Switch is really too big to fit in my pocket, and I already own a Switch. I wouldn't buy a Switch Lite just to take with me into work. So really that sort of forced me into stuff that was older that I had already previously owned that I could fit into my pocket. So I actually went and I searched through all my consoles and I dug out this guy that's been collecting dust since like 2016-ish, my PlayStation Vita. So why exactly pick the PS Vita among all handhelds? Well, I actually really didn't give it, I feel like, that much love in its initial run when it was like still a living supported console. I was more of a 3DS guy back in the day. I mean, I played this thing a fair bit too back then, mainly for Persona 4 Golden. But the Vita library, I've heard so much about and people talk about it. Plus, you know, the PSP stuff that's also on the store still. So I'm like, you know what? If I want to explore the Vita library, I might as well do it now. Oh, by the way, I should mention that this is a stock Vita. There's no mods. The original memory card, the stupid Vita memory card, is in this thing. from when I got it like a decade ago. So the first game I actually decided to play on this Vita was a game that I had bought like 7-8 years prior, like as a cross-buy game for PS4, and just hadn't gotten around to in a long time. It was a game called A Boy and His Blob. A Boy and His Blob is a cute little 2D puzzle platformer made by WayForward, published by Majesco, originally a Wii game before getting ported to a bunch of consoles later on, but more particularly the PlayStation Vita.
A Boy and His Blob is a very cute and charming game overall. The art style, which is very much inspired by old 2D hand animation, is very fun and very homely feeling. If there's anything that this game exactly nails, it's that. Just that feeling of like wonder and excitement and awe. This game perfectly executes on that. This game's entire gameplay revolves around the blob because you, the boy, do not really have any abilities whatsoever. You can only really jump and throw jelly beans. And so when you throw jelly beans, the blob can eat it and then turn into whatever object that corresponds to that jelly bean. Really, this game is much more puzzle than platform. You really have a lot of time to sit and think and observe a situation and think about how you're going to use your jelly beans and your blob in order to maneuver yourself through. Really, my biggest problem with A Boy and His Blob is that it can very much fall into jank a lot of the time. Just certain mechanics or certain edges just don't really feel sanded out. Again, the platforming just doesn't feel quite right when you really have to do like more quick precision platforming. Where this game really falls apart for me though is when the game tries to do boss battles. It is forcing this really slowly paced, chill puzzle platformer into like this split-second precision-based game, which again, the platforming does not support. They really break a lot of the game's strengths, really force the game into some of its worst moments, into that valley of jank. I understand that these boss battles are here to mix the game up, that you obviously need some amount of variety at a certain point. I never find that any of these boss battles are particularly fun. They're just mild nuisances to very frustrating in order to put up with, and they just never make me feeling particularly good once I complete them. I'd rather just go back to platforming.
There is one particular thing though that really soured me on this game and really affects its ranking in my mind, even though it's not necessarily strictly the game's fault. I was on the final world playing this game, and the game's save file just decided to corrupt itself. Yeah, and I don't have PS Plus anymore, so it wasn't like I had a backup in the cloud waiting for me. So I just had to replay the game on PS4 to get all of the footage that you're seeing here and get back to where I was in the Vita version.
All right.
The next game I ended up playing on my Vita was a PSP game called Crush, released in 2007 and published by Sega. Despite the name, it's not actually a dating sim. I know, disappointing. It is a puzzle game with some light platforming elements here and there. To be honest, the most spectacular thing about Crush is the fact that I was even able to buy it all. I mean, I feel like people kind of know at this point in 2024 how dilapidated the PlayStation Store is for PS3 and Vita at this point. Just stuff being delisted out of nowhere. The functionality just being broken. You have to search for stuff. You can't browse anymore. So the fact that I was able to buy Crush, which got a digital release in 2009, in 2024 on my Vita, props to that.
Crush's core mechanic, which the entire game revolves around, is being able to take 3D worlds and flatten them into 2D and vice versa in order to collect enough orbs and reach the end of the stage. The genius about this game is that it really forces you to think entirely different about game level design in order to get the solutions to these puzzles. This setup can create some pretty devious puzzles that feel impossible to solve before you get the gist and get a feeling for how the mechanic just inherently works. I also really like the game's art style. It's set in a dream world with various locations from the main character's memories as the backdrop. So you get some pretty weird locations as the background for a puzzle game, like a carnival, for example. It's appropriately a very surreal game for a game about exploring the self. You have to deal with a lot of self-moving boxes that eat people, man-sized cockroaches, and alarm clocks, all to get to your next objective. There is a story in the game, but I would consider it much more of a fun framing device and a nice bonus more than anything else. Although the story does have some funny moments in it, I will say. I found Crush to be very well suited for portable play because during my work breaks, if I ever got stuck on a level for way too long, that was fine because if I went back to working for a couple more hours, came back on a different break, my brain will have reset at that point, picking up the game again, and I can solve whatever puzzle I was stuck on. Compared to if I was just trying to play this game all in one go, I would get stuck pretty often, and I could not for the life of me figure things out.
I would personally recommend you guys check out Crush, not just because I think it's like a mildly good game or anything like that, but it truly is one of those hidden gems. I mean, that term gets tossed around a lot and stuff like that, but it really is a game that I really don't think that many people ever talk about. In fact, the only way I actually found out about this game was from fellow YouTuber Young Junko in one of his many videos where he talks about PSP games, and so I decided to give it a try, and so I like it a fair bit, and I hope you guys all go out and try it, maybe even emulate it if you don't have a Vita. And the next game I ended up playing for Vita this year was Tearaway. Tearaway was a game created by Media Molecule, the same studio that made the Little Big Planet games, and published by Sony Interactive Entertainment in 2013 for the Vita. Tearaway thematically at its core is a game that is about the relationship between the developer and the player. That it's not just that the developer creates this, framework of a video game for us to have memorable experiences in. It is just as much about the player themselves creating the memorable experiences within this framework and how both developer and player are both combined into what makes video games great and memorable. The game's fine.
Tearaway is what I'd loosely call a platformer. You go through this world in order to close the big hole in the sky showing your face. Yeah, I'm serious. Yeah, if you couldn't tell up to this point, you're not really playing the game for any sort of sense of challenge, of intense platforming, or even really like a deep story, but more for the experience. Experiencing what exactly? Well, all of the cute writing and the fun set pieces. This game is very much a tech showcase for the PlayStation Vita, which translate into you're gonna have to use a bunch of the gimmicky PlayStation Vita features in order to get through the game, but it's kind of the entire point of the game and why you're even engaging with it in the first place. There are large amounts of this game where you have to just keep one finger on the back touchpad in order to engage with the game world. But given the extremely slow-paced nature of the game, having one of your hands hobbled a little bit in traditional controller mobility in order to have these cool moments of being able to interact with the game world is worth it in my opinion. The game's aesthetic is beautiful and incredibly well done in my opinion. It's very arts and crafts focused. Lots of paper material, confetti, glue, stickers, and cardboard strewn throughout the world. But it's not the photorealistic versions of these materials. Since you are in a world entirely made of this stuff, the game does take its liberties on how real these things look, yet these are still recognizable as their respective materials. As a result, this game's art style still holds up, in my opinion, a decade plus later, despite the Vita being obscenely weak hardware-wise in current year. If there's anything particularly interesting or cool about Tearaway, particularly to me, it's that it has my favorite photo mode in any video game ever made as of right now. For someone like me who gets paid to take pictures sometimes, video game photo modes have never really scratched that itch for photography in the same way that having a physical camera in my hands does. But Tearaway has managed to remedy that by having the photo mode be tied into the motion controls of the Vita system, mimicking actually holding a camera, which just changed the game for me.
Now, the first big game that I ended up beating this year was Super Mario Wonder. It's a very wonderful game, haha, that came out for the Switch in October of 2023. Now, I did not play it initially when it came out, just because I was busy with stuff at the time. But in like January 2024, I decided, you know what? I need to play this game. I gotta play it. It's 2D Mario. I hear lots and lots of great things about it. I went into Wonder pretty blind, which I know seems like a weird thing for a Mario game to not go in knowing anything, but I went into Mario Wonder pretty blind and not really looking up that much coverage, which I know seems weird for a 2D platformer. It's not really heavy on story, but I like being surprised going into games like this, seeing how they do things and interesting things that they do, especially with like the wonder mechanic and all of the stuff that they do with that. There's a lot of in-the-moment surprises that shocked me and brought me joy in the moment, and stuff that I had known them in advance might not have been as exciting.
See, I remember when people wondered how 2D Mario could even come back in a post-Mario Maker world, when you are competing with literally infinite free levels. How do you create a next official 2D Mario installment that can distinguish itself from that? Well, Nintendo's answer to compete with their own product was to really focus on quality by making the best and most interesting levels and with unique mechanics, and just going through and selectively choosing the best ideas to implement. Which I know sounds like a really stupid and obvious observation, as, well, every video game should focus on high quality and bringing the best to the surface, but hear me out here. As it turns out, Mario Maker has essentially raised the floor on people's standards for 2D Mario content enough that the previous approach of the new Super Mario Bros. Games were not good enough for the average person at that point. And as a result of Wonder's excellent quality, it's allowed Mario Maker to coexist with the regular 2D mainline Mario games now. All this is to say, Wonder is really excellent. It feels really good to control in a way that 2D Mario hasn't felt for a long time. It has a precision and a snappiness to it that really feels out of the era of CRT televisions. And it has this timeless quality to the gameplay that I really like about a lot of Nintendo's games. The Wonder mechanic is a genuinely brilliant concept. It really does keep you on your toes as a player to expect anything and everything, and to force you to learn and adapt on the fly. It's also very clever because it's a subversion of your expectations that works no matter what your skill level as a player is. If you're a very experienced 2D Mario aficionado, these Wonder mechanics are stuff that you really haven't seen in a 2D Mario game before. Meanwhile, if you're a kid that's never played a 2D Mario game before Wonder, that subversion of expectations of the Wonder powers is still there. It's just in the matter of, it's an abrupt shift from all the more normal platforming that you did earlier in the stage.
Mario Wonder might be my favorite 2D Mario game now. I'm not exactly sure yet. I haven't really given it that much thought. It's definitely in contention with Super Mario Bros. 3 as my favorite. And Mario 3 holds a lot of nostalgia for me personally, just because I played it a lot on the Game Boy Advance and stuff. And so that's really sort of like my appreciation for Mario comes from. So for Mario Wonder to come out and really sort of like challenge like my preconceived notions of like 2D Mario and what I like about it, and is really fresh and interesting and exciting. Very good. Alright, for these last two games, I ended up wanting to play them on PC just because I could push them way higher in terms of resolution and refresh rate than their native console versions. And the first one I played on PC is Kingdom Hearts 3. Kingdom Hearts 3 was a game that came out in 2019 on PS4 and Xbox One, published by Square Enix. And I did play the PS4 version initially a couple of years ago, but for my most recent playthrough, I decided to just jump in with the PC version. Get all this really extravagantly nice 4K HDR footage of Kingdom Hearts 3 for no reason in particular. This game is just sort of odd in the general discourse just because, like, people were anticipating it for so long, and people who weren't Kingdom Hearts fans jumped into it, and they just had like a bunch of stuff that they had to learn and absorb like all at once because they didn't play any of the side games whatsoever.
I think a lot of my problems with KH3 is that the game doesn't really feel seriously committed to its approach regarding its own story, if that makes any sense. On one hand, it feels like a large chunk of this game, the developers are like half committing to sort of Kingdom Hearts 3 as like another episodic installment of the adventures of Sora, Donald, and Goofy. I think there's an interesting appeal to that idea I really like, but the literal decade plus of plot development since Kingdom Hearts 2 cannot allow that episodic installment thing to happen because the developers themselves set up this expectation that all this side game stuff will be resolved in Kingdom Hearts 3. But on the other hand, for the grand finale of the Xehanort saga, it seems like the game's not fully committing to that either. The grand finale aspect of this game isn't woven into like any of the major Disney worlds. It's just all shoved in at the very end, and itself is arguably rushed. It also doesn't help that due to the tying up of the plot points aspect of the plot, the game really doesn't have any of its own interesting narrative or interesting things to say, that you just kind of jump right in and are just like, okay, we're gonna go and resolve everything previously, but kind of forgets to tell its own story. All of the most interesting things that Kingdom Hearts 3 does on a narrative level happens at the very end of the game when the story's already over. So I guess you just gotta wait for Kingdom Hearts 4.
I really, really do like Kingdom Hearts 3. The problem is that the game just has so much stuff that I don't like sitting in front of the stuff that I do like. I mean, literally, the base game, people were not super big fans of on release. And then you get to Remind, and the combat's way more refined, and it seems like maybe the writing got a little bit tighter and stuff like that. And so what I like about Kingdom Hearts 3 is Remind specifically, which came bundled with the PC version. But you kind of have to traverse through all of the base game stuff, which is not as good. By Square Enix that got remade and released in 2022. Now, when I say remake, it is not the same kind of remake that FF7 got, where everything was essentially built totally from the ground up with new writing and new scenarios and voice acting and everything like that. This remake is a visual remake with really the underlying bones of the game still there, but with a new fresh coat of paint, which the best way I could describe it is that it's a PSP game wearing the skin suit of a PS4 game, and that sounds about as horrifying as it actually is to experience. The game on a technical level does objectively look better than the PSP original, and you may be tricked into thinking the entire game looks good based off of like still screenshots or a handful of cutscenes where the motion capture really works with the high fidelity models. But for the most part, it's just like PS2 era, like game fidelity, motion capture, characters acting out things, but with like these ultra high grade 3D models. And it's just so uncomfortable.
Shoo shoo ha! Take that, bad guy! Shoo shoo ha!
Ah! No! You got me!
First off in the game, let's talk about the story. What story? I'm being serious here. Crisis Core really doesn't feel like it has a cohesive story at all. There is a literal sequence of events, a beginning, middle, and end, things that should vaguely look like a story if you squint really hard. Just nothing really feels like it naturally flows into anything else. Feels like there's a lot of like large jumps in logic and like large time skips, and it just feels like incomplete. It just doesn't feel like a whole story. It also doesn't help the game's storytelling. The voice acting is very bizarre. I don't know exactly what's going on here, since the remake voice casts are all proven to be pretty capable of giving good performances as seen by games released both before and after Crisis Core Reunion. There's one particular moment early in the game that I think sort of embodies all of the generally terrible voice direction that went into this. It's a scene where Tyler Hoechlin as Sephiroth is putting all of the emphasis on all of the exact wrong parts of the sentence reading this line.
It means Angeal has betrayed us as well.
Hey, at least the gameplay's good. Psych, I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm doing something wrong here, but the game just seems so incredibly shallow. It's just a matter of spamming certain attacks the enemies are weak to, dodging at the right time, and managing your various like resources like your SP, MP, and HP with items. And there's nothing else. There's no other interesting dynamics going on here. And mind you, I was playing the game on hard mode, and I could just brute force my way through the game. Now, I know what people are going to say. Oh, well, this game's so shallow because it's a PSP game. I think that the PSP was capable of a lot more than the kind of gameplay that this game has, considering how many other great action games existed on the platform at the time. So this is just a Crisis Core thing. I don't know. I might make a full video on Crisis Core at some point in the future. I just feel like I have a lot to say about it as a game that I really can't get into here when I'm talking about a bunch of other games in context. So I don't know, if you're interested, leave a comment or something.
Content resolved.
Okay, so if you were to ask me to rank all the games that I had completed this year into like a list relative to each other of how good they are, this is how I would do it. Rebirth at number 1, obviously game of the year for me. Astrobot / Astro's Playroom at number 2. In tight contention with Super Mario Wonder. I have to give it the edge to Astrobot though, just because I think it's got a little bit more juice. Shadow of the Colossus remake on PS4, fantastic game. Kingdom Hearts 3 at number 5. There's a lot of really good moments and stuff, but there's also a lot of stuff that drags it down. Jedi Survivor at number 6. Very fun 9th gen game. Tearaway at number 7. Medieval Remake on PS4 at number 8. And then for the digital only games from there, Crush on PSP would be number 9. Number 10 would be A Boy and His Blob. And then number 11 at the very bottom, Crisis Core Reunion. This year has been very fun for me for video games and stuff like that. I didn't play a ton of the new releases, but I did have fun with what I did end up pick up and playing and stuff like that. 9th gen gaming seems like a lot of it's a disaster right now, but seems like I picked the right choices for things to jump into this generation with a PS5. So anyways, guys, what did you guys think about 2024 in gaming? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Did you play a lot of games that didn't even come out in 2024? Leave a comment down below if you want to talk about your favorite games that you played this year. Leave a like if you like this video. Hit up my Patreon down in the description so you could help me get more games so I could play them, make another video like this possibly in the future. Anyways, guys, that's it for the video, and have a good day.